answer. I'm going to ask, we want to get through as many questions as we can in this session. So try and keep your question kind of short and to the point, and Tony will try and keep his answers as sort of not short and to the point, because they need to answer your question, but we'll try and be efficient. All right, so group one, I believe you all have identified a question. So who wants to ask the question from group one?
We've got Daryl volunteering from group one, and Jeff might ask the second one.
Okay, well, Daryl, let's go.
Hi, we were wondering how many wind turbines would be needed to power the whole of Devon?
Okay, do you want to give him an answer?
Not off the top of my head, Daryl. It would need working out. I can work it out briefly, but it's not something.
Maybe when you're in your next breakout groups, we can try and see if we can make a little guess of it. So, group two. Who's got a question from group two?
Never actually decided on a question, Master, and I didn't make a note of any of the questions, unfortunately. But how much power will we need by 2050?
Well, I mean, that was answered in one of my slides from the Committee on Climate Change. You say the electricity use will double by 2050. So that broadly speaking, that's the answer. Right. Twice as much as we use now.
Double. And I forget what the other question was. So if anyone wants to kick in from group two, because I can't remember what they were now.
Well, we'll come back.
Sorry, where's the prime locations in Devon going to be for the wind turbines? Where the prime locations for the wind sites in Devon?
Okay, well, that's a question I'm going to be talking about in the last part of my presentation. I think we'll just put that one on hold if we can. Because my last part of my presentation deals with that. Okay.
Okay. So now from Carrie's group, we had a couple of questions. So group three, John, did you have one?
Yes, I have a question as to how much carbon is produced to build wind farms and batteries, and how long will it take for that to become carbon neutral?
That again is a question that I deal with in the last part of the presentation. Okay. So we'll come to that. I do think it's an interesting topic area though. I, for my sins, worked in the North Sea back in the 1970s and was part of a team involved in building what was then the deepest offshore oil field in the North Sea, north of Shetland. And that single oil field, the platform and topsides used 75,000 tons of steel. And no one ever asked the question about how much carbon was involved in producing that steel.
Different type of world now, isn't it?
Yeah.
So I'm coming back.
It's just interesting that we don't ask the question about our fossil fuel systems.
Yeah. Same.
Going back to group one, who was it? Sorry, I've forgotten who else said they were going to ask a question in group one.
My question has already been covered.
Okay.
We were talking about locations and you're going to talk about it at the end of the presentation, so that's fine, thank you.
Yeah, okay. we had some others. I can pick one and ask it if you want, or do you want to move on, Kayla?
No, go for it.
So what effect should onshore wind have in terms of the total change to renewables overall in Devon? I'm just picking one at random.
Okay. Can you repeat that one for me?
What effect should onshore wind have in terms of the total change to renewables overall in Devon? So I think that's, I've obviously picked
yes, I understand that question now. Again, that's something I'm going to be talking about, the share of renewables in Devon that onshore wind currently has.
Okay.
is a question that I will answer later on. Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to go back to group 3. I think David and is it Sarah?
Yeah,
Sorry.
David here. It was with regard to your last graph. I had difficulty in sorting out the criteria. I couldn't quite see the colors on my laptop. And I just wondered if you could explain that a little bit, or is that something we need to come back to later, have a look at later?
No, I'm happy to talk about. So this was the graph from the Committee on Climate Change about the sources of electricity generation going forward to 2050. Well, what it shows is that variable renewables will grow from about 100 terawatt hours to about 500 terawatt hours. So they're going to go up by a factor of 5 between now and 2050, or that's the forecast they have in their central scenario. So a very large expansion in variable renewables, which includes onshore wind.
And what else? So what other things would fit into that criteria? That's what I was trying to get to.
Yeah, sure. So variable renewables will cover wind, clearly, solar, which are variable in nature, tidal, if we develop tidal energy, but that's perhaps not particularly likely. So those would be the key large-scale variable renewables that we would see coming into the mix.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, Sima, I believe you had a question as well from group 3.
Yeah, hi Tony. My question was, you mentioned we need to green our electricity and double the production. So what do you mean by greening our electricity?
Well, taking fossil fuels out of electricity generation and increasing the proportion of low carbon and renewable sources of electricity. So that would include nuclear, but primarily the prime source is variable renewable energy, which would make up about 2/3 of electricity production in 2050.
Thank you.
Okay, do any of the other, we've got time probably for one more question. I'm going to come back to either group 1 or group 2.
Quite an interesting one from group 1 about who would own wind farms and therefore who would benefit from any additional revenue for excess energy that wasn't used in Devon.
Well, that's a smashing question. I think that's really up for grabs. There's a strong push towards communities owning wind energy, and that's certainly something that I think would help.
It's something we're going to be looking at quite a lot on Saturday. So, you know, with looking at some of the different sort of options for ownership. So we'll have a chance to dig into that. Yeah, we'll have a chance to dig into a bit more of that on Saturday. I'm told we've got another good question from group 3. Carrie, did you have one on behalf of your group?
Yes, I'll just read it to be quick. It was, how will the energy generated be stored?
Well, electricity storage is an interesting and I think sometimes misunderstood area. There's a big push towards battery storage, but batteries could only store electricity for relatively short amounts of time. So the grid will need to adapt to more renewable energy. And so we will see things like demand side response becoming much more important than they are now. Demand side.
You might need to explain that.
That means managing electricity demand as well as electricity production so that we can match the two more easily. At the moment, you know, we plug into the grid and expect it to deliver the electricity we need. It's likely that as we roll into the future and look at smart electricity grids, that many more users of electricity will have to manage their electricity demand to help balance the grid. So we're going to see some technology changes that are going to help. And while storage is important in the short term, the long-term storage of electricity, which we have some capacity for in things like pumped hydro at the moment, is likely to be limited. So it's more about changing the system to enable it to balance more than it is about storing large amounts of electricity over weeks or months. That's something that's unlikely in my view.
Okay, well, I suggest we leave it there for now. We will have another opportunity to be asking Tony questions after the next presentation, but we are going to take just a short break. I have timed it particularly badly for anyone who's being called and pulled towards the football, but please don't get engrossed. Come grab a cup of tea or go for a stretch, have a bit of a comfort break, and we will restart with another presentation from Tony at 8:05. So do try and be back here for 8:05.